We all dream of winning the lottery. We imagine that if we just had enough money, all our problems would vanish. We could buy whatever we want, stop working, and live like kings. But history teaches us a darker lesson. That sudden unearned wealth is not a blessing. It is a virus. This is the story of the Spanish Empire. In the 16th century, they didn't just win the lottery. They found the bank. They discovered the largest source of silver the world had ever seen. They became the masters of the earth, the first empire on which the sun never set. They had the best army, the biggest ships, and a direct line to God. And then they watched it all burn. They learned the hardest lesson in economics, that gold is not wealth. Gold is a drug. And Spain was about to overdose. To understand this tragedy, we must travel back to a barren, freezing plateau high in the Andes Mountains of modern-day Bolivia. The year is 1545. The location is Potosí. Before this moment, Spain was a powerful nation, but it was not economically invincible. They were a society of warriors fresh from the Reconquista. Deeply religious and hardened by war, they valued the sword over the ledger. But everything changed when a local indigenous man named Diego Hualpa stumbled while chasing a llama. To catch his balance, he grabbed a bush, and when the roots pulled away from the earth, he saw it. Shimmering veins of pure silver. He had found the Cerro Rico, the rich hill. It was a geological freak of nature. The mountain was practically made of solid silver ore. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived, they couldn't believe their eyes. This was the El Dorado they had been searching for. They immediately set to work, and Potosí transformed from a desolate wasteland into one of the largest cities in the world. Within a few decades, it had a population larger than London or Paris, exceeding 200,000 people. It was a city of greed, violence, and unimaginable wealth. Perched at 13,243 feet above sea level, where the air was so thin men gasped for breath just walking down the street. The Spanish king Charles V granted Potosí a coat of arms in 1557 with the words, "I am rich Potosí, treasure of the world, king of the mountains, envy of kings." These weren't empty words. Between 1545 and 1810, Potosí alone would produce more than 1/3 of the world's silver. Some estimates suggest the mountain yielded close to 2 billion troy ounces of silver, approximately 90,000 tons of pure wealth extracted from a single mountain. But to get the silver out, Spain needed labor. And this is where the economic miracle begins with a human nightmare. The Spanish instituted the Maita system, a mandatory draft of indigenous labor based on an old Incan practice, but twisted into something far more brutal. 1/7 of all able-bodied men from 16 Andean provinces were conscripted to work in Potosí. At any given time, 13,000 workers were distributed to mines, stamp mills, or various tasks in the city. They worked in week-long shifts in the dark, suffocating tunnels, not seeing the sun, carrying heavy sacks of ore up rickety ladders. It was said that if you squeezed the silver coins of Spain, blood would drip out. The mountain was known locally as the mountain that eats men. Historians estimate hundreds of thousands died in these mines over the centuries, though the exact number remains disputed. What is not disputed is the horror. But digging the ore was only half the battle. The ore was low grade. To extract the pure silver, the Spanish used a revolutionary industrial technology, the mercury amalgamation process, introduced in the 1560s. They mixed crushed rock with toxic mercury and had men trample it with their bare feet. This patio process was a chemical revolution. It allowed Spain to extract silver at an industrial scale never seen before in human history. By 1560, with 3,200 laborers working the mines, Potosí was shipping 5 million troy ounces of silver per year. The amount was staggering, unprecedented, world-changing. And this is where Spain made its fatal mistake. They thought they had solved poverty. They thought infinite money meant infinite power. Imagine you are the Spanish crown in 1560. Silver floods into Seville by the shipload. You have more money than any kingdom has ever possessed. The treasure fleets cross the Atlantic, bringing fortune after fortune. Between 1500 and 1650, Spain extracted as much as 300 tons of silver per year from the Americas. You can afford the best armies, the finest navies. You can wage war on multiple fronts. You can build an empire that spans continents. You are invincible. But they didn't realize what was happening beneath the surface. The silver wasn't making Spain rich. It was poisoning it. When the treasure ships arrived in Seville, something strange began to happen across Spain. Prices started to rise. At first, slowly, then faster, then uncontrollably. Between 1500 and 1650, prices in Spain increased by approximately 400%. This became known as the price revolution. The inflation rate was between 1 and 1.5% per year, which seems small by modern standards. But in the 16th century, when monetary systems were based on the physical supply of precious metals, this was catastrophic. Here's what the Spanish crown failed to understand. Money is not wealth. Money is a claim on goods and services. When you flood a country with silver, but don't increase the production of actual goods, bread, wine, tools, ships, weapons, you don't create prosperity. You create inflation. Every Spanish coin could buy less and less. A loaf of bread that cost 1 real in 1500 cost 4 reals by 1650. Wages couldn't keep up. The people of Spain grew poorer even as their king sat on mountains of silver. This is where it gets worse. The inflation spread from Spain to the rest of Europe. Spanish silver flowed out to pay for wars in the Netherlands, campaigns against the Ottomans, conflicts with England and France. The metal flooded European markets, debasing currencies across the continent. Prices doubled in the first half of the 16th century alone. Spain had accidentally exported its disease, and European merchants learned to exploit it. They realized they could manufacture goods in their own countries where prices were lower, then sell them to Spain where prices were astronomical. Spanish silver flowed out. Foreign goods flowed in. Spain's own industries withered and died. The Spanish nobility, accustomed to living off treasure fleet proceeds, began to look down on anyone seeking to build commercial or industrial enterprises. Why work when you have infinite silver? Why invest in factories when you can simply buy whatever you need from abroad? The Inquisition had already driven out the commercially minded Jews and Muslims after 1492. These entrepreneurs took their skills to the Ottoman Empire and the Netherlands, leaving Spain bereft of the very people who could have built sustainable wealth. The people who remained were wedded to traditional pursuits: farming, sheep-raising, ranching. Spain became a parasite, living off its own veins of silver. And then came the bankruptcies. Despite having more precious metal than any nation on earth, Spain couldn't pay its bills. King Philip II inherited a debt of 36 million ducats from his father, Charles V, along with an annual deficit of 1 million ducats. Philip needed money to fight wars, to defend the faith, to maintain the empire. So he borrowed from Genoese and German bankers at increasingly desperate rates. Interest rates grew from 17% to 48%. Still, he borrowed more. The empire ran on credit, secured against future silver shipments that never seemed to be enough. In 1557, just 2 years after inheriting the throne, Philip defaulted on his loans. The suspension of payments affected millions of ducats of debt. The settlement wasn't fully negotiated until 1566. It involved handing over crown monopolies to the Fugger banking family. It was humiliating. But the borrowing resumed. The wars continued. The debt grew. Imagine the paradox. You are sitting on the largest silver deposits in history. Ships arrive monthly with treasure. And yet, you're bankrupt. In 1575, Philip defaulted again. This time, it was worse. The suspension affected 14.6 million ducats, equivalent to 2 years of total royal revenue. The Dutch Revolt and the Holy League Wars had strained finances to breaking point. When the Cortes, Spain's parliament, stalled on funding requests, Philip had no choice. The Medio General Settlement in 1577 imposed write-offs between 30 and 58%, depending on the loan. On average, the king agreed to pay back just 62 cents on the dollar. His bankers took massive losses. But they kept lending. Because what choice did they have? The entire European financial system had become addicted to Spanish silver. The 1580s brought brief respite. Then came the Spanish Armada. In 1588, Philip sent the largest naval force ever assembled to invade England. It cost approximately 10 million ducats, roughly 2 years of total revenue. The Armada was destroyed, scattered by storms, defeated by English ships. Spain had to spend another 10 million ducats rebuilding the fleet just to defend itself from counterattack. The financial devastation was total. In 1596, Philip defaulted for the 4th time. He died 2 years later, having presided over the slow-motion collapse of the richest empire in history. His son, Philip III, inherited a nightmare. The flow of silver from the Americas was drying up. It slumped by half during the first 15 years of the new king's reign. The costs of defending Spanish America from English and Dutch raiders kept rising. In 1607, Spain declared a moratorium on its debts yet again. Bankruptcy had become routine. Between 1500 and 1900, Spain would default on its debts 13 times. A world record. But the fatal mistake wasn't just the borrowing. It wasn't just the inflation. It was what Spain failed to build. While silver poured in, Spain neglected everything that creates real, sustainable wealth. They didn't invest in education. They didn't develop industries. They didn't foster innovation. They didn't build institutions that could survive beyond the silver boom. The treasure from Potosí, instead of being used to stimulate industry and commerce, created an attitude that held productive work in contempt. Manual labor became shameful. Entrepreneurship became suspect. Foreigners, Genoese, Dutch, Germans, ran Spain's trade and finance to their own profit, while Spaniards lived off their inheritance like trust fund children squandering a fortune. Spain went from being the hegemonic power in Europe, with the largest economy on the continent in the mid-1500s, to becoming a financially exhausted second-rate power by the end of the 1600s. The empire that controlled Mexico, Peru, the Philippines, the Netherlands, Naples, Sicily, and Milan, the empire on which the sun never set, had been hollowed out from within, not by foreign conquest, not by military defeat, but by wealth itself. The silver had acted exactly like a drug, providing an intense high followed by devastating withdrawal. Spain had overdosed on its own success. This is the terrible irony. Potosí still exists today. The mountain is still there, its peak now collapsed from centuries of mining, thousands of tons of rock removed from its core. People still work in those mines, under conditions not much better than the 16th century. They extract tin and zinc now. The silver is mostly gone. But the mountain that was supposed to make Spain eternal couldn't even sustain the city built around it. Potosí, once one of the largest cities in the world, is now a struggling Bolivian town, its colonial architecture crumbling, a monument to what happens when you confuse treasure with prosperity. Here is what Spain should teach us. Wealth is not money. Wealth is not resources sitting in the ground. Wealth is productive capacity. It's educated workers. It's functioning institutions. It's innovation and enterprise. It's the ability to create value, not just extract it. The Spanish had infinite silver, and it destroyed them because they stopped producing. They stopped building. They stopped creating. They became renters, not makers. They lived off the past instead of investing in the future. And the lesson echoes today. We see it in resource-rich nations that remain poor, countries with vast oil reserves that never develop, their populations impoverished despite sitting on fortunes. We see it in lottery winners who go bankrupt, in inheritances squandered, in windfalls that become curses. The pattern is always the same. Sudden unearned wealth destroys the habits that create sustainable prosperity. It makes you lazy, entitled, dependent. It makes you stop asking how to create value and start asking how to spend what you have. And when the resource runs out, when the silver stops flowing, you discover you've built nothing that lasts. Spain learned this lesson in the cruelest way possible. They won the lottery. They found the bank. They discovered more wealth than any civilization had ever imagined. And it killed them. Not quickly. Slowly. Over decades. As their industries died. As their currency collapsed. As their empire crumbled under debts they couldn't repay despite having rooms full of silver. They learned that you cannot eat gold. You cannot wear it. You cannot live in it. Gold is just a metal. And when you forget that, when you mistake the symbol for the substance, you doom yourself. The mountain that eats men ate more than indigenous miners. It ate an empire. It devoured Spanish power, Spanish prosperity, Spanish potential. Cerro Rico, the rich mountain, made Spain the poorest wealthy nation in history. A contradiction that should be impossible. But there it is, written in the archives, documented in the bankruptcies, visible in the ruins of Potosí. The empire died of its wealth, corrupted by its own success, destroyed by the very treasure it sought. And if we're honest, we recognize the temptation, the dream of sudden wealth, the fantasy that money solves everything, the belief that if we just had enough, all our problems would vanish. Spain had enough, more than enough, and their problems multiplied until the empire collapsed under the weight of its own treasure. That is the warning. That is the lesson history screams at us across the centuries. Wealth without work is poison. Fortune without foundation is fatal. And the lottery, whether it comes from a mountain of silver or a barrel of oil or any other windfall, is not a blessing. It is a curse disguised as a gift. And Spain paid the price for forgetting that truth.